Hey, good morning. Today we're going to talk about how to solve quadratic equations. Now, we've already talked in class about the fact that you can use factoring, you can complete the square, or use the quadratic formula to solve quadratic equations. So on this one, I'm going to show three different methods, but if you're not sure what to do, quadratic formula always works. Okay, so let's take a look at this first one. We've got x squared plus 8x plus 15 is equal to 0. Okay? So on this one, I'm going to solve by factoring. So I'm going to do a quick diamond problem. So I do 15x squared. What multiplies to be 15x squared and adds to be 8x? So that's going to be 5x and 3x. Multiply to be 15x squared and add to be 8x. So I can then use my area model and say, okay, this is my x squared here and 15 here, and then my 5x and my 3x, and then I just have to figure out the outsides. That's going to be an x, that's going to be an x, this is going to be a positive 5, and this is going to be a positive 3. So this factors out to be x plus 5 times x plus 3 equals 0. And then I just have to set each factor equal to 0. Use the zero product property. So what value of x will make this factor be 0? And that's going to be a negative 5. Okay, so x plus 5 equals 0, and x plus 3 equals 0. So one solution, like I just said, was negative 5. The other solution is negative 3. All right, so we can go through on that one solving by factoring. The next one I'll do a slightly different way. All right, so on number 2, when we take a look at this, I've got p squared minus 9 is equal to 0. You'll notice that it's missing the middle term. It's missing that bx. So this would be like the ax squared plus bx plus c. So I've got my ax squared part and my c part, but I'm missing the middle term. If that is missing, there's something really nice that we can do. We can just add 9 to both sides. So now I have p squared is equal to 9. And then to get what p is equal to, I just have to square root both sides. But we wrote that symbol in, so we have to do the positive and the negative of the square root of 9. So that's going to be plus or minus 3. So our solutions for this one, p could equal a positive 3, and it could equal a negative 3. Now, this was also the difference of two perfect squares, so you could solve this by factoring. You can also use the quadratic formula, but when it's missing the middle term, this is probably the fastest route to solving that quadratic equation. All right, so for these last two, I'm taking a quick look at this one, and it's hard to tell if it's going to be factorable or not. Okay, like I could try and do the diamond problem area model, and I could try and do the same thing on this one, but I have showed you a factoring one and one where we just isolate p. So now on 3 and 4, we're going to talk about how to use the quadratic formula. And the quadratic formula works every single time. So I'm going to write that on the paper right now. All right, so right up here is our quadratic formula. X is equal to the negative b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. So I'm going to use the quadratic formula on problem number 3 and problem number 4. All right, so to use the quadratic formula, the first thing we have to do is get our a, b, and c values. So remember that the standard form comes from ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. Okay, that's our standard form. So this is where we're going to get our a, b, and c values. So for this specific problem, even though it's an m instead of an x, that doesn't matter what the variable is. The a value is always going to be what's in front. So on this problem, a is equal to 3, b is equal to 1, and c is equal to negative 3. So the 3 for a, positive 1 for b, and a negative 3 for the c value. Now I just need to substitute this into the quadratic formula. All right, so now I've got all of those values substituted in. My b was 1, and my a was positive 3, and my c was negative 3. So all I've done is put those in to the quadratic formula and I used parentheses. This is important. You want to make sure that you use parentheses so that you don't make any small mistakes on your signs. All right, so as we go through and solve this, a negative in front of that 1 makes this -1 plus or minus, and I like to do this one piece at a time. So 1 squared is a positive 1. And then I'll multiply these three numbers, so -4 times 3 is -12, and -12 times -3 is positive 36. So I'm going to add 36 because it was positive, because that negative times that negative makes it addition. Now, if this didn't have a negative, here with the -3, if that was positive, then I'd make it subtraction. Okay. And then I have the 2 times the 3 to make that 6. So as we continue to simplify, I've got -1 plus or minus the square root of 37 all divided by 6. And the square root of 37 that's an irrational number. It's not going to work out to be an integer. And I have my plus or minus in here so that we have our two solutions. So our two solutions are -1 plus the square root of 37 divided by 6. And our second solution is -1 minus the square root of 37 divided by 6. So even though they don't work out to be integer values like number 1 and number 2, these are still the solutions to this quadratic equation. All right, so now we're going to do the same thing for number 4. I've already written out the A value is 2, the B value is 3, and the C value is 3. Now I just need to substitute those into the quadratic formula. All right, so now we've got that substituted in. Here's my B. My B was 3, and my A value was 2, and my C value was 3. So I'm just substituting those in using parentheses. So now as we go through to simplify this, this is going to become a -3 plus or minus the square root of 3 squared is 9. And then I've got -4 times 2 is -8. And then -8 times 3 is -24. So that's going to make it subtraction. And then 2 times 2 is 4. So now as I continue to simplify, I've got to do 9 minus the 24. And with that 9 minus the 24, that's going to be a -15. Okay? So now when we take a look at this, we can't do the square root of a -15 on your calculator. It tells you it's a domain error. We talked about this, and this is the extension question. So in order to master this, you don't have to do this to get a level 3, but if you want a level 4, you'll need to be able to do this. Once you get the square root of a negative value, we have to pull that out as an imaginary number. Remember, the imaginary number is the square root of -1. We call that the I. Okay. And the way that that works is that we're going to basically take that negative out and make it an I. So pulling that negative out to make it the imaginary I. So we have our solution -3 plus or minus I times the square root of 15. And then we can split that up using that plus or minus to our two solutions. So one solution is -3 plus I times the square root of 15 divided by 4. And the other solution is -3 minus I times the square root of 15 all divided by 4. All right, so on this last example, I wanted to talk a little bit about how you have to set things up first. So before we can factor or use the quadratic formula, we need to have the equation equal to 0. So right now we've got this quadratic, we know that it's quadratic because we have our x squared, but it's equal to 5, and we need it to be equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides. So I've got 3x squared minus 2x minus 5 is equal to 0. Once I have it equal to 0, then I can try factoring or using the quadratic formula. On this one, I'm going to use the quadratic formula. And our A is 3, the B value is -2, and the C value is -5. So that's our A, B, and our C. Okay, and once we substitute that in, I've got my B is -2, my A is 3, and my c is negative 5. So I've just substituted that into the quadratic formula. And if I've got a negative, negative 2, that simplifies to be a positive 2. And a negative 2 squared, notice it's in parentheses, negative 2 times negative 2 is a positive 4. And then I've got negative 4 times negative 3 is negative 12. And negative 12 times negative 5 is positive 60. So I'm going to be adding 60. And then 2 times 3 is 6. All right, so we're going to continue to simplify this. So I've got 2 plus or minus the square root of 64 divided by 6. And the square root of 64 is a pretty nice number. Square root of 64 is an 8. So I'm going to have x is equal to 2 plus or minus 8, and then divide by 6. Okay. So on one of these, I'm going to have 2 plus 8, and then divide by 6, and then 2 minus 8, and then divide by 6. Okay, now, as you do this, you want to be careful. When you're typing this into your calculator, if you don't hit enter before you hit divide by 6, your calculator's not going to understand the order of operations that you want it to do. That's why I like writing it out like this. So 2 plus 8 gives us 10 over 6, and 2 minus 8 is a negative 6 over 6. So this one simplifies to be negative 1, because negative 6 divided by 6 is negative 1. And then with this fraction, I've got positive 10 divided by 6, so I can reduce that fraction by a factor of 2. So this is 5 over 3. So my two solutions are negative 1 and 5/3.